So I just finished up all the content in Chapter 5 of Deltarune a couple days ago and enjoyed it a lot, but I wanted to take this week's video back into the topic of gym work and lifting, since I feel like I'm retreading a lot of the topics related to gaming, media consumption, and along of mental health stuff as well. So today I really want to go in depth with what I do, why I do it, the anecdotal results that I have for myself, or basically what just worked for me, and generally just clearing up a large amount of noise you'll hear on social media that you can easily get lost in. I'm also a little bit stung after learning about the pricing and the state of the physical edition of GTA 6 as well, so I want to give some time to fully develop my thoughts on that as well. So without further ado, let's just get straight into this one. So I've actually been going to the gym for on and off periods for quite a while now, about 4.5 years as of today. But I'd say that from that, I've only really had about a year and a bit of practical experience in actually going to the gym, with a lot of periods, especially between 2023 and 2025, basically being a few weeks on and a few months off. But I've stayed pretty locked in since about December of 2025, so going on about half a year now, and I've made a pretty impressive progress with my physique. For reference, the heaviest I've ever been was about 95 kilos at 6'2", which for reference is about 210 pounds. And this is by no means severely obese or even that overweight, but I still did have a bit of mass on me, more than I particularly wanted at least, even for someone at my height. And while it was also partially due to some medication that I had been taking, there was also a brief period where I did have a fatty or inflamed liver, so I did need to lose a bit of that weight. But at the same time, my main method of achieving this was just by sleeping in and skipping breakfast, so I'm only really having 2 meals and some snacks rather than 3 snacks. So all of this to say, I was by no means in a healthy position, but also not really that unhealthy as well, when I did decide to get back into my gym work about 6 months ago. And started out at about 88 kilos, aiming to cut down to a relatively lean base, and then planning to slowly bulk up from there. I wasn't really sure at the time how far I wanted to take the cut, but again, my general principle was to set a baseline weight values to kind of check in at, and then see from there if I wanted to continue a cut or start maintaining the frame that I had instead. But I adapted pretty well into the cut plan that I had set out for myself, which I'll go on to later on in this video, but it was to a point where I think some days I was only getting minor cravings when I was eating about 800 to 1,000 less calories than I was giving out, which I'm still shocked at, as I just managed to go crazy fast for my first ever proper tracked cut with little to no stress until around the end of it. I had kept checking in at my baseline weight values, checking my frame at 85 to eventually 82, 80, and around the high 70s, that was when I could start to see my visible abs come in, which I was really excited about. And I thought that I'd stop at about 75 kilograms, but I took it a step further and I stopped officially once I got down to a clean 72.4 kilos, which I'm still very impressed about. It was only around the 73 to 72 range where the craving started to become a bit more of an issue around discipline, and I started having a few more cheat days than normal, but I still managed to stay pretty disciplined, and I got down to that number at around the start of June, and I had slowly been bulking my way back up to around 80, and I'm currently sitting in the high 73s to low 74 range right now. Losing 15 kilos or about 33 pounds over the course of half a year was something I was pretty proud of, and I went from having a slightly overweight frame to a pretty leaned out physique with some pretty good vascularity as well. Nothing like stage lean wise, but definitely noticeably lean with visible abs and barely if any love handles and face fat around my jawline. And one great aspect about getting to this lean point once is that you can pretty easily maintain, or at the very least get back into shape from what I've seen and heard. So I'll be able to reap these rewards for a pretty long time. And I managed to achieve this in a little under 6 months again, which is just insane. I know there's a general sentiment around bodybuilding being a long-term delayed gratification task, and how to not expect crazy results in a short time frame, and I do honestly agree with that as well, but I'm honestly surprised at how quickly I got the results that I desired, and while I did definitely benefit from having a pretty good experience with gym work before this time period, I'm still honestly just shocked at how quickly I was able to achieve this, and using a relatively simple and easy to implement plan and principles. There are really three pillars for getting into shape bodybuilding wise that you want to prioritize with all equal importance, as they play a vital role in not only building muscle but just making your life a whole lot easier. And these would be exercise, diet, and sleep. Sleep is probably the one that I struggled with and do struggle with the most. And while I will say until at least fairly recently that I was averaging around 8 hours of sleep a day, there were still a lot more nights than I'd like to admit where I was honestly getting as little as 3 to 4 hours, which is definitely not ideal. Sleep is unbelievably important for recovering and feeling better during the day and during lifts, but also especially for cutting, as there's a pretty significant amount of energy that you burn while sleeping. So if there's any one takeaway I can give you to stick with, just please prioritize your sleep to the same standard as weightlifting and diet. As far as diet goes, I went for a philosophy of a more inclusive rather than exclusive diet. Rather than cutting stuff out, I'd rather either just find alternatives that fit my macros or taste better, or just fit the thing that I wanted to eat into my diet and work around it for the rest of the day. Tracking was a godsend, as I could do this really easily and make sure I was hitting my macronutrient goals every single day, which while I was cutting was at least zero point 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight, which usually range between the 130 to 140 gram range, and at least 0 0.3 grams of fats per pound of body weight, which was around the 50 to 60 range for me as well, and then filling up the rest of whatever I had left with carbs. There's a lot of diets that I've seen around that play around with eliminating carbs or fats from your diet completely to help achieve weight loss. And while I can see some psychological benefits from doing something like a ketogenic diet in specific cases, for most people, in my opinion, it's just a bit of an extreme approach, as fats and carbs are both pretty important macronutrients that I valued a lot. Without going too much into it, there is a significant amount of evidence from studies that do show that a low fat intake below the zero point 0.3 gram per pound of body weight metric significantly impacts hormones. And I can tell you from anecdotal experience that going into a gym session without a good amount of fast digesting carbs in your system compared to not is almost completely just night and day. And another thing that I also want to touch on briefly with diets is that protein is important to a point. Like on my current diet, I'm eating on average around a gram per pound of body weight or even more, but this is honestly just accidental due to a lot of the foods that I have been selecting just being naturally high in protein. And honestly, it gets to a point where I'd rather be allocating a portion of those calories to go towards carbs. Again, it is pretty well documented now that there is a point of diminishing returns with protein at around 0.7 to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. And I cannot, in good faith, earnestly recommend anybody focusing on going above the recommended amount of zero point 0.8 grams per to 1 gram per pound of body weight, as you're not getting anything extra out of it and are far better off just dedicating those calories to stuff like carbs, which can keep you more energized and feel fuller as well throughout the day, making stuff like bulking and cutting just a whole lot easier. Now, on the lifting side of things, I follow a fairly science-based approach, focusing more on training frequency rather than total session volume. I run an anterior-posterior split that's modified to basically just be push-pull legs, but with the leg day cut in half and sandwiched in between the push and pull days. So on my anterior days, I'd be hitting push plus quads and adductors, and on my posterior days, I'd be hitting pull plus my lower back or erectors, my hamstrings, my glutes, and my calves. I run this twice a week, so I go to the gym a total of 4 times a week, and I also go bouldering on the side with some friends twice a week as well. So depending on whether I go bouldering on separate days or on the same days as my gym sessions as I've been doing recently, I'm pretty much just going to be doing something physically active for a couple hours, 4 to 6 days a week. On top of this, I also do walking on an incline treadmill after each of my gym sessions for about 20 minutes, and also do about 2 sets per exercise, with some movements only having 1 set due to either me playing around with volume for recovery so I can better progress, or just because I don't want to do more than 1 working set of barbell back squats and stack the worst session fatigue of my life. I find this more science-based lifting approach to be far more appealing than the more conventional bro science, and whilst there definitely are extremes on both ends, as it does not take long to find some absolute heinous exercise routine that's only based in theory with no data on it on Instagram, the more modernized brand you'll see in circles on TikTok, as opposed to the Jeff Nippert and Mike Israetel stuff you'll find on YouTube, is more of the stuff that's up my alley that I particularly follow. And this isn't to say that I don't think there's no value in that scene, however, or that the TikTok side has realistically less ideal information, as whilst I don't usually listen to anything that Mike Israetel says, Jeff Nippert, I actually have been following for quite a while, and I find a lot of his content to be pretty helpful, especially for beginners, and especially in the realm of exercise selection, along with his app for tracking nutrition. That's also my preferred calorie tracking app, even if it is a little bit on the pricier side. As I said before, I don't think the TikTok side is perfect either, as there is an alarming amount of people in the niche that tend to be a little bit griftier than I personally like, even if bodybuilding as a whole historically does lean a little bit more center and right than my liking. But even in the more leftist space, I see someone like Yo Talks, for example, more of an entertainment, more for entertainment value, I guess, rather than anything, as there is no way in hell that I'm trying out Newton extensions or switching up from doing a preacher curl. All respects to him, as I do genuinely find a lot of his trolling pretty funny, admittedly with a few exceptions. So generally the main ways that I get information is from TikTok and also from YouTube a bit, with by far the person that I find the most amount of helpful and insightful information from being Jacob Ostricher. He has an unbelievable amount of easy to understand beginner content that breaks down exercise routines, how to hit each muscle group, and what types of broad exercises you should be doing for each session, along with incredibly concise dietary information and advice that really helped me out during my cut, and also some good reminders for sleep as well, which again have been there for me when I really needed it at times. Content's great, and while I do feel like there is a bit of a disclaimer that I should give, that he is openly taking gear, and did actually recently compete in his first open enhanced bodybuilding show, but he's also always preached that he would be doing the exact same stuff that he's talking about as if he was still natural, which I come to respect a lot. I'd also like to shout out TNF and Omer, who have been also giving me a lot of great advice, especially Omer, who has stepped away a bit from the science-based community a bit and is more into the philosophy and mental health side of content, but is still great, and again, another just great content creator that I get a lot out of. Also like to shout out to the Incredible Bulk, who does have pretty long videos, but also gave me some pretty good information about dietary stuff, which I definitely will be looking in a lot more, because I am on a bulk now, and I'm low-key finding it a lot harder than when I was cutting. Another shout out to Scientifically Jacked and Scientific Snitch, great couple who both individually make great content, especially Scientific Snitch, who also has really good, relatively unbiased information, debunking a lot of the influencer guru stuff and promoting an actual realistic, healthy lifestyle, which I appreciate a lot. Kale PT, I also get a bit of information out of, but I personally followed him more for his gaming content. And whilst I don't really watch much of his content anymore, or just as of recently, Ryan Jewers also has some great stuff. Now, there's probably some stuff that I missed out from memory, but that's pretty much where most of my information comes from. And I also want to touch on the fact that some of the creators I've mentioned here do actually have a lot of conflicting ideas and training methods, and that leads me into another topic, which is that there is admittedly a lot of conflicting information around lifting advice, even for people who, in my opinion, are pretty reputable sources, but that main takeaway is that a lot of people mentioned above is that when it comes down to the nitty gritty, they really only disagree with a small part of what's actually important when it comes to building muscle and living a healthier lifestyle. Consistency is far more important than any specific exercise selection, and as long as you are training every single muscle group with good intensity, at least twice a week, with a good range of volume, or adequate volume, it genuinely does not matter how many sets extra or less, or what rep range you're doing, or even what exercises you are doing for a muscle group in some cases, as long as you are progressing each and every single week with, again, adequate volume, adequate intensity, stuff like that. For example, on my anterior days, I do about 6 sets for my chest and only 3 for my quads. For my chest, I'm doing 2 sets each on chest flies, bench press, and incline press. And for my quads, 2 sets on leg extension and 1 relatively low rep range set on squats. With my other sets that I mentioned before, I usually keep them in the 5 or 6 to 8 or 9 rep range, whereas with bench and squats, I usually just keep them in the 3 to 5 rep range. Now, is this realistically optimal for growth in my chest and quads? No! A chest fly and a bench press are both performing the main function of a chest, with the bench press involving a little more delt and tricep. And I probably could lower the weight or add back another set onto my back squats if I wanted to better target those 3 emphasized heads of my quads. Not to mention that I also do back squats, which involve a bit of glutes as well on my ant days, and then I hit Romanian deadlifts and hip abduction on my posterior days, which usually happen the day after. But guess what? I'm progressing on all 3 of my chest exercises and all 2 of my quad exercises. And along with that, the stuff that I'm doing for my quads, the overlap with those muscles there, doesn't really hinder me in training my glutes for my other exercises, as mentioned before, with my Romanian deadlifts and my hip abduction. So even if the volume isn't optimal, I'm still progressing. So I don't care! Which just goes to show that whilst you can collect all the information on the perfect exercise regimen in the world, you will still not make any progress if you don't actually put the work in and outside of the gym. Because again, exercise is 1/3 of actually making progress with your physique. A very dialed up workout regime is not going to do shit for you if your dieting is whack and your sleep schedule is all over the place. And if anything, will just make you feel more miserable, especially while you are doing those sessions. This is why, again, I really like a lot of Jacob Ostrich's content, because he goes into depth into how and why these factors are so important as they are. You need to create a healthy balance between all 3 of these principles if you genuinely want to make the most amount of progress that you can towards your physique goals. So before I wrap this video up, because it is on my lengthier side, probably going to be the longest video that I have, I just want to leave off some general tips that I have for each of these categories so that you can actually take something away from these and start improving your life. As far as exercise goes, look at your schedule and work out how many days you can reasonably spend in the gym. Me personally, I like to work out on the days where I'm already doing something like going to uni or working, so that my free days can actually be spent properly resting most of the time. But to work that out. But anyways, I work that out. And from there, I find a workout split that hits every single muscle group at least twice a week. Importantly, that you like and can actually stick to. From there, choose exercises or just try them out for each and every muscle group that you like and can stick to. And hit that each muscle group and find a rep range and set range that allows you to recover from each muscle group, which does take some trial and error, admittedly, and also time. But once you find that out, it's pretty easy to get down to a routine, and then slowly start adding reps until you cap out on your rep range, and then add on weight to start progressing again, and repeat this for each exercise group, tracking it in one of the many, many, many free apps available. I personally use Heavy, and you should be fine. For diet, I want you to find your rough maintenance calories by looking up calorie tracker on Google and then putting in your age, your height, your weight, your average daily activity level. Be honest with yourself here. And then start tracking your calories with any app that you like, free or paid, aiming for the ranges of 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight of protein, 0.3 to 0.5 grams of fat per pound of body weight, taking the lower or higher end depending on whether you are cutting or bulking. And then filling in the rest of your calories from there with carbs. And also aim to have a more inclusive mindset rather than exclusive, as I mentioned before, meaning that rather than cutting out any type of food or just sticking to one type, try to, say, example, aim to have more whole foods in your diet, but don't exclude processed or even ultra processed fast foods if you don't want to. And if you are consuming them, eat them with the mindset of you're working your diet around them. Don't fall for the propaganda where protein needs to only come from whole food sources. Protein is protein, and okay, whilst I would not take this to the absolute extreme, as that's when you start taking liquid calorie meal replacements like Soylent, which I can never honestly support, as it just sounds like a miserable way of living. Don't feel bad about taking a protein shake if you don't feel like cooking up a chicken breast. Again, aim for a more whole foods approach, but just generally, that's more to just kind of make your life just feel better from personal experience. But again, just don't go into the mindset that you have to completely cut out particular types of food that make your dietary plan way harder than it actually has to be. The only reason that I have ever cut out a meal source was when I realized how expensive getting a Subway sandwich 3 times a week was when I started to budget my money. That is realistically the only option you should ever have for cutting out food. Just choose the path of least resistance that can importantly get you to your goals. Finally, for sleep, whilst this is something I struggle with disciplining myself around a lot, aim for at least 8 hours a night on average. And also, while I can't really do this due to my schedule currently, do your best to aim waking up and going to bed at the same time every day and every night. One great piece of advice that I have is to work out a bedtime that you have beforehand and set a timer for 1 hour before it. And then when that timer goes off, just turn off all your screens and devices and live the last hour of your night as analog as you reasonably can. I usually spend this by flossing and brushing my teeth, and then afterwards doing a little session of light journaling about how my day went, which I've also been doing for about a couple months now. I'll then, along with that, afterwards just kind of reading a physical book at the end of my nights until I start to get a little bit sleepy, and then I go to bed. I found this to be the most consistent routine that I can stick to into getting me into bed and going to sleep when I want to. And that's about where I want to leave this video off for today. I went into a lot of topics and pretty in depth as well, but I didn't want to go too far into this as a lot of the stuff I did talk about today honestly can be discussed for multiple videos endlessly and literally has a whole industry surrounding it. But I guess the point of this video was to help cut through the noise by sharing my own personal experiences with bodybuilding and getting into a lean shape, and talking about the information and advice that I personally followed and helped me get to where I am today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and got some valuable information out of it. Leave a like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment as well telling me about what advice you follow and where you guys are taking your lifting journeys, like where you guys are at with those. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your days and nights, and as always, take care.